when people ask questions, they deserve answers.
And you're implying that emunah pshuta does not mean not to think.
No.
Emunah pshuta implies wisdom. Wisdom that's
emunah
involved.
pshuta means things don't happen by themselves. It's a world of cause and effect.
And even with emunah pshuta, you still need to gain an understanding.
The BT View Podcast.
Shalom Aleichem Rabbi, and welcome once again to the BT View, dedicated to bringing this fascinating sincerity of Baalei Tshuva and their mentors to light, in order to benefit and to strengthen the entire extended community. Today we have Rabbi Isai, the zchus and the honor to spend time with a legendary figure in the Kiruv world, a senior lecturer at HaTorah Yerushalayim, Rabbi Motty Berger. Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Motty.
Aleichem Shalom. Thank you very much.
Rabbi Motty, the Chazal say in Pirkei Avos, Dama shetoshev lapikoros. And I think that if we could darshan today, we could say, Zer Rabbi Motty Berger. Because we know that when we say you need to answer the questions, you can't really answer people's questions because you can't really prove anything to anyone. Everyone could deny anything. They don't have to accept what you say. But if you cause them to have a question, then already it becomes their issue. Because they can't live without a framework that makes sense. And we see how much Chazal put an emphasis on asking questions by the Seder. It's really the key to Messiah. If you can get the child to ask a question, now he's invested. Now he's going to be interested. Now he's going to grow. And I think you have an unusual ability. I would say a God-given talent to be able to arouse questions in others, in mature young Jews. It's amazing.
Perhaps it's because the questions that everybody has are my questions too. I also have to wonder.
That's the secret.
I believe I think from Rabbi Mordechai Gifter, who tells the Rosh Yeshiva. He said, Dama shetoshev la'apikoros. You're really not supposed to talk to an apikoros. He said, it's the apikoros you see every morning when you brush your teeth.
In the mirror.
Yeah, in the mirror. When you... It bothers you.
To that part of you.
Yeah, you have a kasha also.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I see in what you're saying, it could be, and this is part of your success, I see that you actually identify with the questioner rather than coming from a position of being higher than thou, so to speak.
And not only that, but I was raised Orthodox, and I was a shtickle troublemaker. They make the best Kiruv people. In case you guys troublemakers.
It takes one to know one.
Right. But I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people who come through. I wonder if I wasn't raised Orthodox and I didn't feel a natural connection to my family and relatives, would I do it? I think anybody who comes through HaTorah, anybody I see, some of them become Orthodox, some don't, but I think they deserve a basic respect for asking the questions that so many people maybe just try to avoid.
Beautiful, beautiful. And what I want to do is just thank you personally, because you've had a great effect on my life. You have an ability to summarize entire world realities in just a few words. And you've given me the language over the years to be able to give it over. For example, I remember once we came to the old city and you shared that someone asked you in a seminar, Rabbi, how do you expect me to believe that a father could take his son and put him on the altar to take his life? Okay, so he didn't kill him at the end, but how could you even consider such a thing? And you said, I even remember you said that Hashem sort of sent you the answer in the middle that we know is like siyata d'shmaya, that a lot of times when giving over we receive. And you said such a beautiful answer. You said Avraham Avinu wanted to teach his son that if there's nothing worth dying for, then there's nothing worth living for. If there's nothing worth dying for, such as a relationship with the Creator of the world, there's nothing worth living for. You said that everyone knows when they bring children to this world, they're not going to live forever. So if a person brings a child to this world, it must be that there's something worth dying for. That's what Avraham Avinu wanted to teach his children.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think it's a lot of from what Rav Noach gave over.
Yeah.
And it's just, so I have HaKorah HaTorah. Yeah. Baruch Hashem.
Thanks.
So now we just want to get to understand. You were learning at Nei Yisrael under the leadership of Hagon HaGodel, Rav Yaakov Yitzchak Ruderman, Zchon Levrucha, and a total yeshiva environment. How did you come to have a connection with the Tshuva world?
I had a friend, he was Baal Tshuva, and I was living in Baltimore, and he said, we have to do something. There's a group of people, Messianic Jews, Jews for Jesus, that are settling in Baltimore. We have to do something about it. And he kept on bugging me. We have to do something about it. So I said, let's talk to Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, who was Rosh Yeshiva then.
And the brother of Reb Noach.
And the brother of Noach, I didn't know Reb Noach at all then. He was in later the connection of how we ended up at HaTorah. I said, let's talk to him. I didn't know that the Weinbergs were very much into Kiruv. So he and I go to Rabbi Weinberg, and he says, look, it ought to be dealt with, and I'm telling you that you ought to do it. I know you. We knew each other. Even when I was working,
He said this specifically to you, not to your friend.
Right.
Wow.
Because my friend was more of a newer, he wasn't that learned. He said, I said, am I supposed to read their stuff? I said, yeah, you have to know it. You have to really know.
Asking for you.
Right.
Wow.
And he said, but you got to be, people's lives are at stake. You have to really know this stuff. I never got involved in it more than anything I ever learned.
So he almost gave it a sense of pikuach nefesh.
Correct. Which
is really what Reb Noach lived afterwards.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And he said, it's not that there are huge numbers of people. Far more Jews in America will drop out from Jews for nothing rather than Jews for Jesus. But he said, number one, it's a bigger chilul Hashem, desecration of God's name when Jews become Christians. And number two, he said, and I found it's true, it's actually, given that the religion, the governing religion of Western civilization is not Christianity, it's secularism.
He said that at the time?
Yeah.
Wow.
Very much.
It's such an insight.
Therefore, when it used to be that when the Christians ran the world, so a Jew, he would be a coward and he dropped out into the Christians. Right? He would be Meshumet.
Historically.
Right. But now that, can you picture the idea that compared to secularism, even the Christians make moral demands. So when a Jew goes from being secular and doing whatever he wants to get involved in Christianity, that's an aspect of a
He still has
Tshuva.
obligations.
Yeah, and the people and the world's kind of making fun of him and everything. And he's
so it's almost easier to drop out into secularism.
Oh, of course, and therefore, many of them are more likely to hear you out because they're willing to hear what's true and do things that are somewhat unpopular.
Wow, beautiful. So then I understand that at a certain point, Reb Noach asked you to come to teach at Aish in Yerushalayim. What was the job description?
What happened is I went to Eretz Yisrael for a friend's wedding, and my cousin, Rabbi Zelik Pliskin, who was full-time then at Aish HaTorah, he was one of the fantastic teachers at Aish HaTorah, got me to meet Rabbi Noach Weinberg. And I met him. He says, you have to come here and change the world. That was
what he told you specifically?
Yes. Purim afternoon.
Did he know you before this first meeting?
So it turns out that Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg Marshiva had already talked to him about it.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know. He said, you do anti-missionary. If you can get people out of Christianity, you should be able to get them out of secularism.
Oh, makes sense.
It's just another, I found Mahatma Gandhi said every man has his own religion. And when a person says, I don't believe in God. No, figure out what you do. I believe there is no God. Oh, that's one of your major beliefs.
An atheist could really be religious.
Well,
I think
it's the greatest religion possible because a Jew, God could let you know that it's true. An atheist says to himself, I can never know, but I believe it anyway. That's really
total belief.
That's unbelievable amuna. But so I met Reb Noach. He said, you have to come and help me change the world. I went home that evening. It was on Purim. So I said, oh, he must have been drunk.
Wow.
The next day I go to the office and it's, oh my God, he's talking the same way when he's sober. I actually told him no, because I'm a spoiled kid and America is a very nice place. and moving to Eretz Yisrael. My wife is a little more helpful. She's a Baal Tshuva, so she's a little more.
Wow.
And then half a year later, my mother calls me and says, Motty, why didn't you, I was living in Baltimore, and my mom was in Cleveland. My mom said, Motty, why didn't you tell me? You didn't tell me that you're going to Israel next summer for Aish HaTorah. But I don't have any plans. I said, sure.
She knew before you.
Your cousin Chaya is collecting some money in Cleveland to start something called the Jerusalem Fellowships of Aish HaTorah. I call Chaya. I said, what's this all about? She says, she said, I've been meaning to call you. You understand?
This was all going on even before you knew about it.
Yeah, Chaya and Reb Noach, like, they just ran with it. It was
Wow.
And Reb Noach you're a hard guy to get a hold on. So I said, look, what do you want? Come for summer. He wanted me to come for summer of 1984. We'll do a Jerusalem fellowship, so got college kids. For a few months in Israel, give you a nice summer salary and an apartment. All right, I had
nice summer vacation.
Yeah, nice vacation, really active. And my wife and I went there summer of '84. And afterwards, we decided to move to Israel to work at Aish HaTorah.
Wow, amazing. So now, when they developed eventually the world-famous Discovery Seminar, what was your position initially in that?
Teacher. I taught on it.
As a teacher, but I understand that you gave the final class, which is really...
Yeah, the final class and different ones. We all learned kind of different parts of it.
Right.
And see, the nice thing about the Discovery Seminar, the evidence that God gave, that there's a creator, but more evidence that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. Because, to believe in God... doesn't obligate you much. I mean, there's a creator. Things didn't happen by itself. Okay, but...
There's still no obligation that goes necessarily with it.
And let's face it, both Islam and Christianity both believe God gave a Torah. The Quran even talks about giving the Torah. The Christian has the entire Jewish Bible that they call the Old Testament as true. All right, and then the question is their view of what changes. But...
everyone agrees that the Jewish people received the Torah.
Yeah, in other words, and it makes sense because if we're not eternal just for God to play card tricks. He's here. God created humanity for a purpose, and the Jews are the kingdom of priests. Human beings, being by their nature human beings, are fallible and. But we are God's agents.
So you say that has almost more of an effect on young Jews when they hear that rather than just belief in God.
Well, in other words, they know that God alone is not enough. Although a person has a right to say, why do you believe in God? That's fine. But the idea of God transmitting Torah, it's one thing to say there's a God. Another God said that God writes books. Well, he doesn't write books, he narrates, But really, I say to people, maybe the reason that some Jews are atheists is because it's more honorable to God to not exist than to exist and not give a Torah. Picture this. There's a God. There's an infinite being. He creates a world where we are intelligent enough to figure out that there's an infinite being. I mean, even though we're finite, but go through the glass ceiling and figure out. I read somewhere recently that anthropological studies and language studies show that human beings have only grasped the concept infinite for the last few thousand years. 5,786 to be precise. But
we have the ability.
Yeah, so the idea that there's an infinite being who created me with the capacity to know that he exists, and then I say, why did you create me? And that God says in response, don't worry about it. I mean, it's more honorable to say I think in a way it's a Jewish atheist's respect for God to say he doesn't exist than to say he created me and not bother.
He doesn't want to say something degrading.
Yeah. So the idea of transmit now, what we believe is that
There has to be a reason for it, of course.
And
There's
not
a
only
reason,
that,
purpose
but
to
in a
life.
way it's creating us as human beings. So Nasa Adam, in the first chapter of Let Us Make Man, is that from the Big Bang, or Bereshit bara, that Torah's Lashon for Big Bang, from the Big Bang to the higher primates, to the higher animals, which is Friday morning, God did it himself. At that point, God says, okay, let's make an Adam. Different views. Rashi says it means he was talking to the angels, the Kabbalah is saying he was talking to the Spheros. I think it's normally Melech, but one of the Chassidic masters said, God said, let us make man. Who's he talking to? He's talking to Adam. God's saying, Adam, you're part of the animal kingdom. We know from Koheles, Motar Adam in a behema oin. The difference between a human being and an animal is zero. We're the animals that can choose to make more of ourselves. That's the point, God says. You're the animal that can choose to be more than an animal, and by doing that, I have an aspect. God created the universe. God created the human race. I created the me. I could have been an animal, but God gave us a Torah. It's like an IKEA thing. The do's and don'ts of how to create a human being.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. It's almost as if we create ourselves.
And that, with all due regard, the fact that he's God and I'm not, I forget which comedian said that the two basic commandments in the Bible is the two first commandments of the 10 commandments. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. You should have no other gods before me. He said, really, commandment number 1 is I am God. Commandment number 2 is you are not. But we are the beings that can choose a relationship with God.
Yes. That's the key. Wow.
So God's love for us is he creates us with the ability to know to be able to know that he exists and can make a relationship. But relationships are always up to the one who wants it least. Which means that God gave me the great power of making or not making the relationship.
Wow. Wow. Once again, thank you so much for summing that up, even just in these few minutes. My question is, from your experience, what would you say is the contrast between students who would come to Discovery 30 years ago as compared to students who show up to your classes today?
I don't know. On the one hand, we are all massively products of our society, and I think our society, I don't want to be too down on, is so much, our society is increasingly manipulative of the members of that society. Most people, they come into this world, they're kind of victims of a very powerful...
Are you saying that the culture sells certain values?
The culture sells values in order to sell. Now, if you have the most important aspect of modern life, the power of the West is economics.
Finance.
And what I want most is for you to buy my products. And I use advertising to do it. I control the airwaves. I control what you think you really are and what you feel you really are. And it's a manipulative society.
Wow. You're saying even in terms of religious beliefs, even if someone is born in a religious environment, he's being sold other types of values.
And in a way, I would say that when the world was predominantly, the Western world was Christian, with all due regard to Christianity being in conflict with Judaism, it was more in keeping with Judaism than secular Western.
Because there was the idea of religion. There was the idea of being religious and following God.
Not only that, but that Old Testament, there is a God, he created humanity, and then things changed later, the Christian. And then comes along
secularism,
and unfortunately, well-intentioned Jews who said, the Christian world has been so harsh to the Jewish people historically, maybe we're better off with secularism. Maybe a secular world will be nicer to the Jews.
So you're saying it could be even the first maskilim, they meant well in the sense of not to follow a different religion.
Look, I don't think highly of communism, but They meant well. They said, there is no God. How do we take care of people? I think maybe only Nazism can be seen as just a deeply internal, vicious, it's a mole. But that even kind of, there is no God. How do we take care of people?
Which is a social approach.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that, I can see where Jews who look at 1,500 years of difficulty under Christian life, perhaps a secular world would be better for the Jews.
That was the hope.
I suppose.
But now in the aftermath, looking back, you're saying it actually turned out worse because secularism is much further from what Judaism really is.
Yes, and I also think, look, I know there were bad examples in Christian history, but I think a Christian world would be different than a secular world when it comes to the idea of Holocaust. I think, well, it's Dostoevsky, if there is no God, everything's permitted. And that, in the end, a Christian still can have a certain fear of God, saying, God will ask me why I did that.
So are you saying that the Holocaust, even physically, was able to take place because of the advance of secularism?
I believe so. Yeah.
Wow.
That, given the idea that every man has his own religion, and to say there is no God, we're all part of the animal kingdom. I mean, picture Nazism and communism. They are both very different systems. One is more vertical, one horizontal. I won't go through the script, how you see. The two things they have in common, number one is there is no God behind morality. And number two, you can kill tens of millions of people to create the world you want it to be. So that's when the Bible makes that statement early on in Bereshit, in Genesis, where Abraham, when Avimelech asked Abraham, why did you tell me that your wife is your sister? And he says, because I saw there was no fear of God in this land, and so I knew you'd kill me to take my wife. As if to say, look, if you knew there's a God to answer to, you'd be different.
Wow, amazing, amazing. Okay, so I think my main question for today is this whole approach of explaining Judaism and giving a way that makes sense and is respectful or respectable. Well, we could call it the conceptual approach. Would you say is something that's only a b'diavad, which means like, okay, if a person grew up without Yiddishkeit, without the experiential approach, then we'll give you the explanation of what the mitzvahs are about or what Yiddishkeit is about. But if a person grew up already with the experiential approach in the frum Welt, does the conceptual approach have any place, or maybe it's even a lechatchila? Could it be a lechatchila even for those who grew up in the frum Welt?
All right. The Chovos HaLevavos, the brilliant Rishon, talking us about the basic ideas of God and Torah, Judaism, said, when the Torah says, V'yadat hayom b'Shiva, you have to know there's a God and then bring it to your heart.
To know.
You have to know. You have to be able to answer sensible questions. Now, so some would say, well, so like kind of the way you said, Nachum, once people fall out, then you need this to show how do you know it's true. And then we can even talk about why is truth important. But I would say in the secular world where European Jewish civilization collapsed, it collapsed among the thinkers and it collapsed among the feelers also. I mean, you look at the Hasidic world, it collapsed all over. You have to be able to answer a good question.
In other words, irrespective of where a person grew up, even if he grew up within a frum community, a person needs answers. A person, like you said at the beginning, a person needs answers for themselves.
Yeah. And I think it's in the American Declaration of Independence, a decent respect for the opinions of mankind demand of us to explain what we're doing.
It needs to make sense, but as you know, there's been an approach very popular among many Jewish communities, which is emunah pshuta, which the Rabbanim have said we shouldn't really ask questions or look into. You know that there's some who hold, even Baalei Musar, I think, not to learn the first part of Chovos HaLevavos with Sha'ar Yichud. That is this question, is Emunah Pshuta enough? Now, it could be that the Rabbanim answered it because of secularism back then. They didn't want people to be pulled in, because maybe they didn't have enough answers and there were a lot of questions to pull people away. But nowadays that we don't have that, would you say that knowing the answers is really part of our chiyuv, like you say in the name of Chovis Alvavas?
So I am Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, my Rosh Hashiva. See, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg is my Rosh Hashiva. I just thought of him, I was in awe of him and learned tremendous from him. Rabbi Yaakov said, Emunah Pshuta, he held that Emunah Pshuta is knowing that things don't happen by themselves. Elu Mitzia Shelo, for example, when you find a stack of books, a small, bigger one and small, all you need is 5-10 books in the right order to know that didn't just
it's stacked in a certain way.
There was an intelligence that put it there for a particular reason, and you don't have to know why. In other words, and therefore, the wisdom of the creation is what he considered as Emunah Pshuta. He said, Rabbi Weinberg said
the wisdom of the creation. Right. In other words, it implies not a certain amount of knowledge and understanding.
And we see that the Rambam starts with the
first mitzvah is Leida Shiesham.
And then he talks about a little bit of science of the time. Yes. It doesn't matter that we see science. HaTorah, right. And at the very beginning, it doesn't matter to us that science is totally different than what he said. The common denominator between the Rambam and our science is that both look at the genius of creation, and you can't possibly believe it just happened by itself. And therefore modern science is even more astonishing. The idea of every cell of the human body has
it actually becomes more of a reason
to
believe that God created everything for a purpose.
And we would say therefore that it's not that the reason for atheism is not science and it's not intellect. It's that if you accept that one basic falsehood called atheism, everything else is permitted. You don't need any other excuse.
Wow.
And both modern science and Koheles would tell us that we're essentially, we're part of the animal kingdom. And therefore, the animal is natural, the human soul is something you have to slowly work at. Let's take the secular world. Ignorance is much easier to be ignorant than knowledgeable. That's the way it is. And therefore, to work on it. But I would say that when people ask questions, they deserve answers.
And you're implying that Emunah Pshuta does not mean not to think.
No.
Emunah Pshuta implies wisdom. Wisdom that's
involved. Emunah Pshuta means things don't happen by themselves. It's a world of cause and effect.
And even with Emunah Pshuta, you still need to gain an understanding.
If I can bring support for Emunah Pshuta from an intelligent Gentile, I think it was George Orwell. George Orwell said there are some ideas that are so obviously false and so obviously foolish that it takes a genius with an extensive Western education to convince himself that it's true. I don't have every word by it, but that's basically the gist of it.
To rationalize what's so false.
Yeah, but to know that, like Dostoevsky says, if there is no God, all things are permitted. And then human hubris, human arrogance says, don't worry, get rid of God, we'll come up with a wonderful way of how to run life.
And to explain it.
And then here we have a 20th century and 21st century, which says that, no, we're actually closer to intelligent apes than we are moral agents.
So the Emunah Pshuta would really be, don't give up on what you know in your core knowledge from the experiential approach that you know already. But at the same time, do be open to gaining knowledge and wisdom.
For sure. And then I would say, beyond that, a study of history is so important for any Jew to understand what the nature of the Jewish contribution to creating a human race. It's literally, the Torah says we'll be a kingdom of priests. Now this was a time, from the time of the writing of the Torah till the end of the Jewish Bible, was 1,000 years later. It was toward the beginning of the Second Temple period. And all that time, nobody believed in the God of the Jews but the Jews. And yet, the Torah and then the prophets say, the Jewish people are eternal, and nothing will get in the way.
And we're still here almost 2,000 years later.
Not just any, but that nothing gets in the way. You are here to change the world. And it's like, here we are. In a way, it's even more amazing in the secular world, because when you have a religious world, so you say, okay, the Jews are religious, the Christians, they all believe in God giving Torah. So maybe the Jews, like, secretly just live their lives to project the fact that we are God's agents. But for the last 200 years, most Jews have been more secular. Now, what a secular Jew wants most is to convince everybody that we're just like anybody else. We're no different. So here we have 200 years of secularism, in which 200 years of secularism, and the Jews stick out like a sore thumb, saying, oh my God, look what's happened. How did this happen to him?
Well,
as secularly, you'd want people to believe, no worry, there's nothing.
that's the truth of eternity.
We're here to change the world. Probably, and people ask me if am I proud to be a Jew? I don't like the word pride, because being a Jew is God asking of you to take responsibility for the rest of the world as well. That when you live Torah, every mitzvah you do changes yourself, it changes the Jewish people, and it changes humanity as a whole. And that's why
So it's not about yourself just being proud, it's responsibility.
Responsibility. And the Torah talks, the Bible talks plenty about Jewish failure, etc. Because, well, God knew when He picked human beings to make a difference, human beings are fallible. But to me, perhaps, it's just history.
So history itself is the proof, because just the fact that the Jewish people are still around, that was predicted.
Not only still around, but you have a situation where, can you picture that if there is no God, the most natural thing happening in the 20th century is that history affects the Jews the way every other nation is affected. The Jews decided to become more like the power group. We were powerless, and therefore we're going to become more like...
You're saying the majority of Jews today who don't know about the Torah.
Right, so the Jews become more secular, and therefore people accept them more. The more they're accepted, the more they assimilate. The more they assimilate, until they disappear totally. You know, that's also...
That would be the natural course of things.
The natural course is that civilizations are not slaughtered to the last man. The civilizations disappear by their own giving up. Along comes a situation where the Jewish people, it still requires... Nothing gets in the way, not our enemies, not our friends, not even ourselves.
They continue to exist.
But in a way, the kind of crazy thing is that a Jewish people as a whole seem to be saying, let us just disappear. And whether God or humanity says, no, we're not going to let it happen.
Something is going on.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rabbi Motty,
You're welcome.
for spending that time with us today. I want to give you a bracha. Hashem should help, should be able to continue to give over and impart a lot of the emes of Hashem and His Torah to many hundreds of thousands of students for many years to come. And in that schus, you should be zeichel to see bracha and nachas from your own children.
Amen. Thank you so much.
And our viewers, remember, the BT View matters. Thank you so much for all your support that you've been giving us. And of course, if you know anyone who could benefit from these podcasts, please send the link. Please spread it further. Okay, Rabbi Isai. Till next time.
The BT View Podcast.